On this episode of The Airport Economist, doing business in Brazil, Latin America's rising economic superpower. It's one of the world's biggest breadbaskets. How an Australian company is keeping Brazil's crops in good shape. Plus, why a Victorian company has shifted its Latin America focus to Brazil. And from the Amazon jungle to Copacabana Beach, the Australians taking the country's tourism sector by storm. Welcome to Rio de Janeiro, the jewel in the crown of Brazil. I'm Tim Harcourt, the Airport Economist, and I'm going to show you around this economic superpower of South America. Brazil has it all, from agribusiness to a huge resources sector, including oil and gas. It has financial services, manufacturing, with a large car industry, and is one of the world's largest aircraft assemblers as well. To put it simply, Brazil has scale. But while this country is full of excitement and opportunity, it's also had its problems. From military dictatorships to recent issues of corruption in its political system. It's a place to tread carefully. But as a major global economy and member of the G20, Brazil is just too big to ignore. This is a huge country in terms of geography and population. Brazil is 8 million square kilometres, made up of the Amazon rainforest, rich agricultural land, beautiful Atlantic beaches and highly populated megacities. More than 207 million people live here. Brazil has a GDP of over $2 trillion. Although on a per capita basis, that's a tick over $10,000 a head. It's well known for its inequality, although the Bolsa Familia scheme helped boost the living standards of the poorer sections of society. Its hyperinflation of the 1970s is a memory, now with inflation low at 3.5%. Unemployment is 11.6% of the labour force and becoming a real issue after much lower figures 5 years ago. Like fellow commodity exporter Australia, Brazil rides resources booms in rocks and crops and is strongly dependent on Brazil's demand for its iron ore. Brazil's major export partners are China, the US and Argentina. It imports mainly from those countries too. Australia and Brazil are the two powerhouses in the Southern Hemisphere. That means there's a lot of business opportunity between our two countries. And there's plenty of help available for Aussies trying to crack the Brazilian market. We spoke to Australia's Honorary Consul to Rio, Ronaldo Veirano. Now, Brazil's been through some tough political turmoil, but what's the economic outlook?
Well, the economic outlook, Tim, is looking better. We went through a big recession, but I think we're coming out of that recession, and the outlook for the future looks quite bright.
We see some bad headlines, but what are the real challenges facing foreign business in Brazil?
Well, I would say that doing business in Brazil is not necessarily easy. We do have a certain amount of bureaucracy, which for particularly common law countries, they find a little bit disturbing. But we have found from our foreign clients that once they become acquainted with the bureaucracy and the rules governing bureaucracy, it's possible to do business, to make money, and to have fun doing business in Brazil.
Now, we all know Rio for Carnival, for Copacabana, for the Olympics, but what about Rio as a business destination?
The main activity in the state of Rio de Janeiro and the city of Rio de Janeiro is probably oil and gas, some mining because of headquarters of Vale in Rio de Janeiro, the headquarters of Petrobras for the oil and gas business. But there is also activity in the financial area, not as strong as São Paulo, but a lot of smaller investment houses are located in Rio. So there is a diversity of interests, but the bulk of the economy depends on the oil and gas industry.
Do major Brazilian companies base themselves in Rio? And if so, why?
Well, I think the bulk of the companies will establish themselves in São Paulo. But there is a good number of companies located in Rio de Janeiro, including Karoon Gas, for instance, is a good example of a company that is located here. BHP, which has been in Brazil for a long time, and other Australian interests have located in Rio. But São Paulo, as a financial economic center, is bigger than Rio.
What's the Australian image or brand in Brazil business-wise?
Well, Australia has a very good image in Brazil. I think that we see a lot of things in common with Australia. We like the attitude of Australians. Like Brazilians, we enjoy outdoor living, sports. We are rather informal. And you see that Brazilians and Australians get along very well. So I think the image that the country has is very good.
Coming up, the Australian company playing a vital role in Brazil's agribusiness sector. If you're thinking of moving your business into Brazil, it's important to understand that this is a complex market. Politics and the economy are closely linked. Despite the challenges, Australian interests here are growing, especially in the education sector. I sat down with Senior Trade Commissioner Greg Wallis.
There was a pretty severe recession between 2014-16, so that's obviously had a big impact upon the economy in Brazil. The question is, why did that happen? Basically, Brazil spent too much. Brazil had the same commodity story in many aspects as what Australia had. We're a big commodity exporter to China. But what Brazil didn't do or hasn't done, it hasn't really undertaken those fundamental and very necessary macroeconomic reforms to improve the economy. So when things start to go wrong in a hurry. And I think that most people in Brazil recognise that some pretty severe economic reforms are necessary, of the type that Australia did, perhaps back in the 80s.
So what's the Brazilian economic outlook now? Are there any bright spots?
Yes, certainly. The economy has returned to growth in 2017, only about 1.5%, so pretty modest. It's predicted to grow again in the next few years. And one thing to remember about Brazil is that Brazil has a very, very big consuming class. When you talk about consuming classes around the world, Brazil's actually got one of the biggest. There's about 75% of the population is earning $1,000 a month or more. Now, $1,000 is not a huge amount, but by middle income standards in other developing countries, that's actually a lot. So you've got a very big consuming class. Some of the indicators about purchase of vehicles and home ownership have started to go up again. So I think the signs are there that growth is returning.
Despite the political headlines, does life just go on in terms of day-to-day commerce?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. Life does go on. I mean, there's been tremendous political turmoil. I didn't mention that before, of course, but most people are aware that there's been a number of politicians jailed, a number of senior business people jailed. This is something that never happened before in Brazil, and in one sense, that's a very positive thing. But the numbers around, as I said, the numbers around foreign direct investment, the size of the consuming class mean that mostly life goes on. People get very, very disillusioned about the political environment, that's true, but in terms of the business opportunity and what it represents, I don't think it's changed that much.
So is Brazil a difficult place to do business in?
Yes, it certainly is. I mean, when the World Bank says that Brazil is the 125th most difficult place to do business in the world, and that puts Brazil in the company of Iran, Uganda and Tajikistan. So it certainly is a difficult place to do business, there's no doubt about it. But the other side of that, of course, is if you go to Brazil and look around, there's international companies succeeding in every sector there. There's all the signs of internationalisation, a big economy with international players in almost every sector you look at. So it is difficult, but the opportunity is there.
So if you're an Australian or Canadian company going into Brazil, do you still need the government badge? Does that make a difference?
It's a very important thing in Brazil, Tim. The recognition that the Brazilians in general give to the badge of the Australian government is very high. Australia has a tremendous reputation in Brazil. I mean, we're very fortunate across all the sectors that we work in. Brazilians, in many ways, look up to Australia as a model. So the fact that you've got the Australian government working for you in Brazil, I think that it's a tremendous benefit that you should take advantage of.
This is a country of vast mineral resources, and a small Victorian mineral processing plant is cashing in. Gecko Systems is a world technical leader in gold processing and low-energy mining solutions. Its Latin American journey started off in Chile, but soon moved here to Brazil.
We're a small Victorian company based in Ballarat, and we manufacture mineral processing equipment. We started off with a series of our own products, our own technology, and we've slowly expanded that to make whole plants and modular circuits that we export. It's all really based around recovery of gold and silver and precious metals, so we're quite expertise in those sort of metals, but we're branching out into things like pre-concentration of copper and polymetallic ores, but really around the mineral processing. So we're all metallurgists actually in the company.
From Ballarat origins to a global company, how many countries are you in?
We must have exported to over 60 countries around the world now. We expanded into Johannesburg initially, then we opened an office in Canada, we opened an office in Chile, and we've just recently put someone on in Moscow as well.
Why did Gecko focus on Latin America in particular?
Where we started from was really around the market pull. Our technology was starting to get well known in the industry. And so where we sort of went was where the clients were pulling us. Our first installation in South America was down in Argentina. We sold one of our bits of equipment over the internet without even visiting. So we started looking at the different minerals and the markets here in Latin America, and we thought, oh, well, our technology's suitable for the minerals here and the mines. So we decided to expand into South America.
How does Brazil compare as a market compared to other Latin American countries like Argentina or Chile?
You can't treat every country the same in Latin America. That's something I'd really tell a lot of people thinking about coming into business here. Each area has its own culture, and Brazilians are quite unique in terms of their culture as well. It's a big country, it's a big market, but there's a lot of challenges there in terms of taxation and doing business.
So would you call Brazil a high-risk, high-reward country?
I guess I would. The biggest thing about Brazil, for Gecko in particular, is the range of minerals there that suit our technology, and so the market is quite large for a company like Gecko and its products. The challenges are really around, getting equipment into the country, and Gecko's a company that we manufacture out of Ballarat, and we basically always have and exported complete systems out of Ballarat, which has been fantastic because we're in control of that technology. But the real challenge is the taxation, and the import tariffs could be almost 2 times the capital cost of the equipment. Now, that makes it challenging, but there's other ways you can get around that, and one of the ways is what we use is called an ex-tarifario, and that is a tax exemption for unique bits of equipment. And we use that system, and it's one thing that I'd really recommend is that you look at that taxation system quite carefully before you import or export to Brazil.
Still to come, the Australian adventure company that calls itself the Latin America Specialist, how they made it big. Agribusiness is huge here. In fact, it's one of the principal bases of the Brazilian economy. So protecting crops and weeds, pests and disease is big business. Australian company New Farm entered this market in 2005 and hasn't looked back despite some challenges. So tell us about New Farm's story. How did you begin?
Actually, New Farm have a long story. It's over 100 years, exactly 102 years. We started in New Zealand as a very small company. Now we are a true Australian company based in Victoria, but truly global as well. We have operations in Europe, Latin America, North America, and Australia and Asia.
What services do you supply?
We provide products to the crop protection business, to the farmers. So we essentially help the farmers to get more for the land that they have.
How long have you been in Brazil?
Well, we consolidate our operations in Brazil in 2004. So our history, even if we have more than 100 years, is only 14 years in Brazil. So we acquired a local company called Agripec at the time. That's when we start growing the business. And today, we have 470 people in Latin America, in Brazil, of which most of them are commercial people. So most of them are working closer to the farmers.
Why Brazil?
Brazil is a growth market. Everybody wants to be in Brazil. Brazil is the single largest country, or crop protection country in the world. So everybody wants to be present in Brazil.
You hear a lot about Brazil because of political instability. That's headlines. What's it actually like doing business there?
It's clear that socio-political volatility in Brazil is is higher than other countries like Australia, Canada, Europe. Now, we have been present there for the last 14 years, as I said, and we have been very successful. We manage the company with the local management, so they know how to navigate those issues, not only the socio-political issues, but the volatility in currency, for example.
What climatic challenges do you face in Brazil compared to Australia?
It's different. Australia is dry, while in Brazil is more water. So, and even if there is no rain in one part of the country, then in another part of the country rains. So it's very different from that point of view. It's more stable. It's less dependent on weather.
Do you think Brazil has reached its full economic potential?
I don't think so. I used to live in Brazil over almost 25 years ago. And when I was there, we always say that Brazil is the country of the future. Well, I'm going to Brazil now, and we still say that Brazil is the country of the future. So I don't believe that Brazil reached that potential. It's a lot of potential, actually. It's a lot of resources. It just gets to get organized. But from the agricultural point of view, it's still a growing market.
Coming up, my top tips for Australians doing business in Brazil, the other great southern land. This is one of the world's most popular tourist destinations, and it's easy to see why. Brazil has the Amazon in the north and some of the best beaches in the world lining its coast. Australian adventure company Chimu has been introducing tourists to the sights and sounds of Latin America since 2004. Let's see how they do it. Are there any challenges that you face in Brazil that you don't really experience elsewhere?
Well, the main challenge is the bureaucracy. It presents all sorts of issues regarding paperwork, standing in lines. Getting anything done quickly is quite difficult.
But you must see incredible opportunities.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's a transitional market. It has a lot of opportunities. It's still in its infancy in a lot of areas. I mean, in more mature first world markets such as Australia, the UK, they don't have these opportunities that we have here. I mean, it's still coming of age. Brazilians are the ultimate consumers. Everything that makes them an endearing people to us also makes them a wonderful consuming market.
How do you think Brazil differs from other countries in Latin America like Peru in terms of doing business?
In terms of ease of doing business, there are much more developed markets in Latin America, such as Chile, Uruguay. Peru is actually heading that way now. They've taken leaps and bounds in terms of how their economy is progressing, and Colombia. But given the opportunity and given the right conditions, Brazil will catch up to the rest of them in the near future, I believe.
So what sort of tours do you offer?
We offer all sorts of things, from the basic stock standard, Christ the Redeemer, Sugarloaf, to the more adventurous things like cruises up the Amazon, experiences in the jungle. You can go whitewater rafting, adventure tourism, climbing mountains. Yeah, we offer the full gamut of experiences for people who come to Rio.
So apart from work, what's it like for a Brisbane boy living in Brazil?
It's absolutely brilliant. I love it. I mean, look at this. We have the beach. I live here in Copacabana, so we have the beach 24/7. Brazilians are wonderful in terms of their love of leisure and sort of having a good time. I mean, there's never a dull moment here in Rio.
And what's your vision for Chimu Adventures? Where do you think you'll go in the future?
Well, basically, Rio is our spot here. Brazil's our area, and I'd just like to see it develop. I'd like to see us expand in terms of our range of clientele. Maybe open up to a few more markets coming to Brazil. At the moment, we tend to be more focused on the Anglo market, so Australia, New Zealand, UK, Canada, US. It'd be great to hit the Eastern European markets, or the markets that are developing where people are getting a bit more money and a bit more desire to travel to sort of more off the beaten track locations.
So do you have any advice for other Australian companies looking to come to Brazil?
First piece of advice, persistence pays. Yeah, definitely. It'll seem difficult at the start, and there will be massive sort of speed bumps on the way, but stick with it. And at the end of the day, the rewards are definitely worth it. The opportunities are immense.
So what's the easiest way to get here to experience Brazil's colourful culture for yourself, and maybe even do a bit of business too? Let's check in with LATAM Airlines. What's the best way to get to Brazil from Australia?
If you want to reach São Paulo from Australia, We have services from Sydney and from Melbourne that reach Santiago, and then you can connect smoothly to Sao Paulo, to Rio, daily, several flights a day.
Brazil's such a big country. How do you navigate it domestically?
Brazil is a very competitive market, but we compete between being the first and the second in network within Brazil, reach not only main capital cities within Brazil, but also a large amount of secondary cities within Brazil, which makes our network very attractive for all passengers coming into and going out from Brazil as well.
So are there any business travellers that are reluctant to go to Brazil? What advice would you give them?
I've been doing business by myself. I was based before in Chile and I went several times to Brazil. Personally, I've never had an issue in Brazil. I feel very confident of it. I use my credit card. So basically it's just, one of those countries and you can do whatever you want.
So what's a must-see in Brazil, if you can?
Brazil has so much to offer. If you go to Sao Paulo, I would recommend several restaurants. The food is amazing. If you go to Rio de Janeiro, beaches, the Barra beaches or Copacabana beaches are awesome and spectacular, but there are also some other huge and beautiful landscapes in the northern part, or even if you go to the southern part if you want to go to surf. So just pick whatever you want to do, and then you can select what cities or towns you want to visit.
So Australia to Rio, is it easy to get to?
Yes, you can go to Rio de Janeiro with one stop in Santiago. Every day of the week.
If you're visiting Rio on business and you have some spare time up your sleeve, what should you see and do? Let's check with the General Manager of the Grand Hyatt.
I think you can define the Grand Hyatt in Rio de Janeiro as being the only urban resort here in Rio. There's many hotels, many properties. Most of them are business hotels in front of the beach, and the Grand Hyatt differentiates itself by the fact that we're really an urban resort.
In the movie Blame It on Rio, they said that Sao Paulo is the place where the work gets done and Rio was the place to play or have fun. Is that true?
Well, certainly, Sao Paulo is the place to work, and Rio also a place, to play. But Rio has also a large part of business. All the oil and gas business is located here in Rio, in the state of Rio, and so that's a huge business.
When you're doing business in Rio, is it normal to go to dinner with your hosts or go to a barbecue? How does it work?
Well, doing business in Rio, eating and drinking a good beer or a caipirinha, is part of a scene and is part of a tradition. We call it shop. The beer here has to be really very cold and icy cold. They love to drink it that way. And it's a light beer. It's very pleasant. Obviously, time of the year, it's very humid in Rio, so it's great to have a nice shop after work.
Brazil has a bit of a reputation for being a little bit dangerous. Are there any precautions you should take when doing business here?
Well, like any big city, you have to watch, not show too much of, gold and nice watches, and if you got a plastic watch and not showing much jewelry, you won't have really a problem. But like any city, you have to be careful.
So if I had a day off work, what should I do?
The nature, of Rio. So I go to Prainha. Prainha is a very small beach, about 20 minutes from the Grand Hyatt. I'll go to Grumari as well. All those very protected areas of Rio where nature is still at its best.
What's the most important Portuguese word I should know when coming to Rio?
I would say parabéns, to congratulate people. I think that's something that you always do here in Brazil. It's part of the spirit, of a Brazilian.
Parabéns.
Parabéns.
Brazil is a land of charisma. It just gets in your blood. And as well as sand, samba and soccer, it's a substantial economy with business opportunities to be pursued. So what did we learn from our visit? Well, it's a tale of two cities. If you're mainly concerned with banks and financial services, go to Sao Paulo. Rio is the centre for oil and gas services and tourism. Large Brazilian companies like Vale base themselves in Rio. The capital is in Brasilia, in the centre of the country. Remember, Brazil is very international and there's lots of English spoken here, but learn a bit of Portuguese to impress the locals. Be careful security-wise, Brazil has improved but can still be dangerous. Well, that's it for this Brazil edition of the Airport Economist. See you on our next business adventure together, somewhere around the Great Globe. I'm Tim Harcourt, and I'm the Airport Economist. Welcome to Buenos Aires. What are Argentina's strengths?
Argentina has the capacity to feed 400 million people. So its rich resource base is an obvious strength.
You need to come to the market, you need to make connections, you need to build relationships. That's always very important.
Because Argentina is 5 to 10 years behind, this is the right time to do it. Come first, be the first to do it, then you will be known for that, and the sky's the limit.
See you on our next business adventure together, somewhere around this great globe. I'm Tim Harcourt, and I'm the Airport Economist.